In 2006, WWE wanted to take advantage of Pirates of the Caribbean tremendous success in theaters by creating its own version of Captain Jack Sparrow on Smackdown, in the person of Paul Burchill. But everything is far from having unfolded as the company could have imagined. It's a delight to present to you on The Wrestling Paradise our documentary about this original experience that Vince McMahon's federation did with the English wrestler. You will learn, among other things, how this character who had a spectacular and unique entrance was almost cancelled before it really started because of a stupid incident. How he and his wife even called museums to get all his props, but also the mind-blowing misunderstanding with Vince McMahon and Disney that caused this gimmick to brutally end, and even how a tragic event completely turned the Englishman's career upside down. And you will never guess Paul Burchill's current professions, which are more than surprising. You are on the Wrestling Paradise, the Jack Sparrow of the WWE, Paul Burchill. Let's go! When we look at the life of Paul Burchill, this wrestler was born in Guildford in the south of England on October 8, 1979. It can be hard to imagine that this man will eventually become the Jack Sparrow of the WWE by embodying a pirate character in a quite comedic register, which was almost unthinkable at the beginning of his career. Indeed, when he started in the business in 2002, at the age of only 22, in the Frontier Wrestling Alliance Federation, he was a perfectly believable and intimidating character, as you will see. And where his career is even more surprising is that he could very well not have become a wrestler at all, since, as he says, he seemed to be heading for a professional rugby career when he was young. Rugby being the second most followed sport in England, just behind soccer. Another sport in which he was interested, by the way. At the same time, he was also studying sports science, which will get him a diploma and a job as a primary school teacher in his county of Surrey. During those years, wrestling was only a hobby for Paul, looking at some of his compatriots like Big Daddy or Giant Haystacks. For the record, the latter has even wrestled under the name of Loch Ness Monster, the famous legendary creature. But what really changed everything for him, and what definitely made him want to take a chance in this business, was when he saw the TLC match at WrestleMania 17 in 2001 between the Hardy Boys, Edge and Christian, and the Dudley Boys. An iconic clash, where we particularly remember the incredible moment when Edge speared Jeff Hardy in the air. That was when he fell in love with wrestling, and that he decided to make it his profession. And it was a choice that didn't really please his family, since, as he says, it was a decision that was not met with the most positive views. But what was I going to do? Wrestling got me. And at that moment, everything went very quickly for him. He will start training at the FWA, being coached by Mark Sloan, and have his first matches in February 2002, using his real name, namely Paul Burchill. Have a long unbeaten streak that will last until he gets spotted by Vince McMahon's company less than 3 years later at a tryout in Manchester. Apparently, according to him, he was super aggressive in the ring while doing high-flying moves, which is unusual for someone with 6'4" and weighs 247 pounds. And he caught the attention of official John Laurinaitis, who was there, and asked him if he wanted to come work at the WWE. Can you only imagine getting into wrestling while you're still young and managing to get a contract in the most prestigious company in the business in less than 3 years? Clearly, it says a lot about his talent. And it's true that when we look at the athletic abilities he showed in the ring, such as, for example, doing a standing moonsault or other crazy moves, but also his quite massive and imposing physique, we understand he was able to get noticed so fast. But then we can ask ourselves a pivotal question. Certainly, this size and this athleticism made him different in the indies, but are these qualities not common in the WWE? Will it be enough to really stand out in the sports entertainment empire? We can also wonder if he will not have the same fate as other Brits before him in the Stamford Federation, such as the British Bulldog or William Regal, who we will talk about soon by the way, who, despite their talent, never had more than the Intercontinental title. At that time, long before Drew McIntyre made history in 2020, the WWE title had never been won by a Brit. And you will see that these questions will eventually become problems later. Anyway, in 2005, when he had just become father for the first time of a little boy whom he and his wife Jasmine called Haven, he went to the United States for what was a new chapter in his life. And it was at Ohio Valley Wrestling, WWE's place to develop talent, that he was going to train. While he was still living in a motel at the beginning, waiting to get his social security info to be paid. He officially started there on television in May against a certain Nick Nemeth, who we will know better as Dolph Ziggler. For the record, he was lucky enough to be there when OVW was entrusted to Paul Heyman in July 2005. This creative genius who revolutionized the industry with ECW in the 90s and the future special counsel of Roman Reigns. It was good for him because Heyman preferred to highlight wrestlers from the indies such as CM Punk rather than others without any experience in the business. And this will allow Burchill to have a great exposure with many matches. At that time, his theme song was the famous hit You Spin Me Round Like a Record by the band Dope, who covered a single from the 80s. Knowing that Paul Heyman had never been one to worry about copyright issues in those years. And speaking of copyright, it was also around that time that WWE renamed Paul Burchill Paul Burchill in order to be able to own his name legally. But in August, something completely unexpected will happen. While he has only been in OVW for a few months and is having a normal day, Paul Burchill is told at 4 PM that he will have his debut on the main roster that same evening. He's not going to panic though and take what WWE has decided to give him. He's going to interfere to help his compatriot William Regal on Velocity, which is sort of the show with Smackdown's mid-carders, in his match against Scotty 2 Hotty. And from there, the two Englishmen will form a tag team together for several months. So, this is Burchill's official debut in the main roster at only 25 years old. Personally, I think this association was perhaps a little too obvious, since it was totally based on the fact that two men are both English. But it will at least teach Burchill a lot of things. Indeed, he says that William Regal, who was already a true business veteran with almost 20 years of in-ring experience and who was 11 years older than him, was an excellent mentor whose valuable advice he will apply all the following years. On the screen, however, the best they will have will be a few matches for the tag team title. And in December at Armageddon, Paul Burchill will have with William Regal what will ultimately remain his one and only pay-per-view match of this WWE period against Bobby Lashley, who will destroy them because they had not subscribed to the Wrestling Paradise. And then we were, in a way, at a crossroad in Burchill's career. As we might have feared, he clearly had become a mid-carder in the WWE. And, in my humble opinion, despite his remarkable athletic abilities for his physique, his character didn't really stand out, and there was no real project around him. But all of this will completely change in February 2006, when he will experience a complete revolution in his character that could not have happened at a better moment. At the beginning of 2006, the situation on Smackdown was quite special. One of the new faces of the company and one of the most popular babyfaces, Batista, had just relinquished his heavyweight title because of an injury. A title that Kurt Angle got in the end. One of the Blue Show's main eventers, while WrestleMania 22 was just around the corner, alongside Randy Orton and Rey Mysterio, who will face Angle at the grandest stage of them all. But also The Undertaker, who was feuding with Mark Henry, and Bobby Lashley, who was on the way up. On a sadder note, we must not forget that a few months before, in November 2005, the Blue Show had tragically lost one of its most beloved babyfaces, in the person of Eddie Guerrero. So, at that moment, WWE made an observation. Smackdown needs at least one new babyface, knowing that, until now, Paul Burchill was a heel with William Regal, a villain. And during those years, if we go a little beyond WWE, it's a period when, in mainstream culture, pirates were popular. And the reason is very simple. In 2003, Disney, one of entertainment's titans, released the movie Pirates of the Caribbean, that collected the tremendous amount of $654 million in the international box office, with no less than 292 million ticket sales in the United States. And the second movie, which will be released in the summer of 2006, will even bring in more than $1 billion. Figures that represent the cultural phenomenon that it was. And this is a saga that was carried by a character, and not just any character. Captain Jack Sparrow, played by the actor Johnny Depp. A protagonist that the biggest cinema magazine in the world, Empire, has considered as the 14th most popular movie character of all time. And for the record, what's even crazier about this whole story is that this original pirate that Johnny Depp made famous by taking inspiration in his acting from the Rolling Stones guitarist Keith Richards almost didn't exist at all. Because the Disney executive really didn't like how Johnny Depp embodied him. And it's only because the actor said he completely refused to change anything about it and that Disney didn't want to fire him by fear of hurting their reputation, that the Jack Sparrow, as we know, was still born. But coming back to WWE at the beginning of 2006, it is in this general context that Vince McMahon will tell Paul Burchill he will now be a pirate. For your information, this would not be the first time we'd see a pirate character in the company, since the Quebecer Carl Ouellet, who we generally know better under the name of PCO at Impact Wrestling, already had a pirate gimmick in 1995 under the name of Jean-Pierre Lafitte, supposedly being a descendant of the real pirate Jean Lafitte. The conversation that will take place between the boss of the company and Burchill will actually reveal what will become a major problem later. Indeed, while Vince told him he was going to be a pirate like in Pirates of the Caribbean, and that the Englishman, who knew Jack Sparrow and Johnny Depp's particular acting, asked him if he wanted him to be like Keith Richards, the WWE boss replied, "Yes, but dressed like a pirate." And if we read between the lines, we can understand one thing. Vince McMahon didn't know Johnny Depp was inspired by Keith Richards in his Jack Sparrow interpretation, and therefore probably had not seen the movie either. Without realizing it, he therefore instructed him to copy Sparrow, and unfortunately, this will eventually lead to a major misunderstanding. Anyway, in February 2006, Paul Burchill will undergo a complete repackaging, and he will be fully involved in it. He will try to find props and costumes in stores, and he says it was very hard to find some, despite Pirates of the Caribbean's success, and that his wife spent a whole week calling everywhere, including museums, to be able to make his outfit. On the screen, this incredible transformation will be brought in a rather interesting way. First, Burchill and Regal will end their partnership, but staying good friends anyway. And in the funny backstage segment, Burchill will explain to his former colleague and Palmer Cannon, an authority figure on Smackdown at the time, who supposedly represented the UPN network that broadcast the show, that he wants to become a pirate, because supposedly the great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfather of his mother's second cousin was a lieutenant of Blackbeard, the notorious pirate who scared the sailors who crossed the Atlantic Ocean and the Caribbean Sea around the 18th century. And I must say that all the segments that followed were particularly entertaining and allowed Paul Burchill to be put forward more than he had ever been until that moment. On February 10th, while there was an unconventional backstage party, to say the least, he will appear in a way I find completely absurd by cutting a hole in paper with a small sword. It's as if he came out of nowhere, and we are immediately struck by his resemblance to Jack Sparrow, both in his look, with the hair, the bandana, the eye makeup, and in his rather offbeat behavior. What is even more surreal is that his only words in this new look will be the same word addressed to Mr. Kennedy and then to Palmer Cannon. Simply, hello. The following week, we will even bring a new nuance to his character that I find brilliant personally. Mr. Kennedy was telling Burchill he's ridiculous, that the fans will laugh at him. But when Paul threatens him with his saber, Kennedy will change his mind and tell him he will be over. And what I think is amazing is that we have somehow broken the fourth wall of wrestling, since usually the fictional characters we see on the shows should never say the word over, for example, a term which is normally used by business insiders. It's as if Jack Sparrow said in the middle of the movie he hopes Pirates of the Caribbean will be a success in theaters. But precisely by doing segments where we mock Burchill by saying he will never be over, namely popular with the fans, we get sympathy for him. We want to encourage him. On February 24, while shaving with his sword using a piece of glass as a mirror, William Weagle, his former partner, will accuse him of indirectly tarnishing his own reputation as a former teammate by dressing as a pirate. Tell him he has received a letter from a fan who said Burchill besmirched his good name. And again, it's original and funny in my opinion, because seeing Weagle tell him he's ridiculous, as fans, we want to support him. And it's a very clever move from WWE, because it helps to like Burchill even more. This scene will end with him giving Weagle a fake bump, who will start to panic in an extraordinary acting. And the following week, while the latter was still preaching to his former teammate, Paul is going to cut his tie. All of this will lead to his first match with this new pirate gimmick on March 10th, 2006, against William Weagle precisely. And it is on this day that we will be able to enjoy, for the first time, his absolutely amazing entrance. While William Weagle is waiting for him in the ring after having won the crowd, they are going to see someone completely ridiculous be humiliated. Paul Burchill will appear on what seems to be the stage and jump by holding on to a rope like a pirate on a ship. In my eyes, it was really original and very relevant, because if there was one wrestler who had to make his entrance this way, it had to be the one who played a pirate. It was really a unique and spectacular entrance. We hear for the first time his theme song, which begins with a small sword sound, which I think is great, with music that reminds a lot of the original Pirates of the Caribbean soundtrack, an obvious source of inspiration. On his Titantron, we also notice a pirate flag, and Paul Burchill looked totally comfortable during his entrance, confident and being in self-mockery. We felt that he didn't take himself seriously and that he was actually playing pirate. And that's also what the fans must have appreciated, since he got a nice pop. We will see him throwing fake jewels to the crowd during his entrance, and even posing on one of the ring's poles where he seems to be looking at the horizon just like a pirate on his boat. One moment that I also think is great is when Weagle, who was laughing when he saw him until now, is going to be scared when Burchill shows his sword. We can really say that Weagle, by all of his reactions and his always excellent acting, has largely helped to sell Burchill even better as a pirate to the fans. Without the shadow of a doubt, his character was distinctive. And in the ring, he kept what had been his qualities since the beginning of his career, with, in particular, an entertaining finisher that will be called Walk the Plank, which means to be forced by pirates to jump in the sea on a ship, where he manages to do some kind of backflip while making his opponent do a front flip. And personally, seeing all this gimmick and presentation, I'm not at all of the same opinion as some observers who found this character stupid and who considered it was a sabotage of Paul Burchill. From my point of view, he was more entertaining than ever, with a very strong identity, unlike before when he was quite random, and even in the rest of his career, as you will see. He was good in his gimmick, funny, and in my eyes, it's important that WWE makes references to mainstream culture, like Pirates of the Caribbean in this case, because it's something that will speak to casual fans who have increasingly stopped watching the shows over the years. Through this pirate character, we get out of the wrestling bubble, and we are inspired by something that literally tens of millions of people have loved around the world. So, on the contrary, this new role was a blessing in Paul Burchill's career at that time. But the craziest thing is that everything was almost ruined by an unlikely incident. The day of his first match as a pirate could have turned into a disaster and completely jeopardized this new dynamic. Indeed, by making his entrance for the first time in rehearsals in front of Vince McMahon, Paul Burchill injured his knee. What you should know about this entrance is that, on the one hand, it certainly had the advantage of being unique, but on the other, it had the disadvantage of always being dependent on the ceiling's height in the arena. And as you can imagine, it is never exactly the same depending on the arena. Burchill also said that, because of that, he always did his entrance on instinct, hoping that everything would go well since the speed at which he arrived was not always the same. Anyway, on that day, he tested his entrance, and by the time he was on the top rope when he was in the ring, he says that when he landed, he felt his knee imploding. Vince asked him right away if he was okay and to go get his injury checked by doctors. As Burchill himself told, "All that day I got injections. It was just about getting through the match. I was told, you can go get your knee fixed, but I can't guarantee there's going to be a spot for you when you come back." So it was with a knee injury that Burchill had his first match. And we can see that he was ready to risk his health to be able to keep the spot he was given on the show in this new role. But on the other hand, we can also think that with an injury in his first important appearance, things didn't seem to go in his favor. The following weeks, the most remarkable thing for Paul Burchill is the continuation of his comedic angle with William Regal, who wants him to stop dressing up as a pirate, which will lead to a really crazy situation between the two men, in which they will face each other in a match with an incredible stake. If Burchill loses, he stops being a pirate, but if he wins, Regal will be forced to wear the disguises that Burchill chooses. And of course, the pirate will win, and we will have hilarious segments where we will see William Regal dressed up as a woman, a bear, a chicken, and even a gorilla. I think it was awesome in terms of absurdity and entertainment, with also that great moment when Burchill was poking his buttocks with his sword. Look at Regal's acting! We can only admire his talent for being funny in all of these ridiculous outfits. And it should be noted that, in the conversation they had on screen, Burchill had told him he was having fun with this character, and that it was working for him since he had remained undefeated for several weeks, with victories as a team with Crystal against Regal and Jillian, another one against Booker T after the latter left the match to chase the boogeyman who had kidnapped his sweetheart, Charmel, and also against Washi Brown. Unfortunately, he got eliminated in the Battle Royale to qualify for the Money in the Bank match of WrestleMania, a Battle Royale that Bobby Lashley will win. But on the other hand, he will be one of the very few participants who gets to do his entrance, which shows that WWE still gave him some importance. I'm also a fan of the short moment he had at WrestleMania 22 backstage when Booker T and Charmel ran into him while he was on his own, looking like he was having a fight in his head against an imaginary enemy. He looked crazy in this little scene, and I think it was great. As for Paul Burchill himself, he says he had fun being in this pirate character, which was obvious anyway. Even if, when Vince presented the idea to him at first, he was still a little disappointed not to team up with Regal anymore. In my eyes, he really had a great gimmick, and it was probably the best thing that could happen to him in terms of originality and identity to really stand out from all of his colleagues. It remains nevertheless true that with a gimmick like this, a heavyweight title run, for example, was completely out of order. It wasn't serious enough to aspire to a major belt, but we could have believed that the Intercontinental title, for example, with perhaps the idea of conquering territories like a pirate, and this belt with blue elements, which could remind us of the sea, the oceans in a way, would perhaps be within his reach, and that there was something to be done creatively. As a matter of fact, this gimmick could perhaps evolve over time towards a much more credible identity worthy of a major title, just like Triple H, who embodied an aristocrat at the beginning of his career before becoming one of the greatest. But unfortunately for Paul Burchill, things will get complicated for him. and this pirate gimmick will have an unreal ending. In the spring of 2006, when things seemed to be looking good for him for several weeks, Paul Burchill would see the spotlight he had on Smackdown without being a main eventer go up in smoke. This entertaining dynamic he had with William Regal for several weeks will come to an end when they will have a tag team match in which Regal is still disguised and Burchill will abandon his compatriot in the middle of the match and therefore let him lose, which will ultimately be the end of the funny storyline that they had. Burchill will make appearances at the Velocity show where he will lose against the Road Warrior, and besides, for the record, he had been accompanied in his entrance by Shelly Martinez, who seemed to be his new partner, but in the end, it will only take place once. It should also be noted that in the ring, he was sometimes drinking from his flask in the middle of a match, and that his pirate character seemed to have a drinking problem. He will then lose on SmackDown against Finlay and 2 times against Mark Henry, especially at the beginning of June in just 54 seconds, by being completely demolished by the world's strongest man. While everything was going well for Burchill, he ended up getting totally buried after 4 months without ever embodying this character ever again. And that leaves us wondering, why was he so brutally buried? You will see that the explanation for it revolves around 2 essential elements. The first one concerns Vince McMahon. Apparently, if this gimmick was so abruptly stopped, it was because the WWE boss had never heard of Pirates of the Caribbean and never seen the movie, which William Regal also confirmed, and that Paul Burchill's acting, which was therefore greatly inspired by Johnny Depp, did not please him. Vince would have preferred him to do like the character of Jean-Pierre Lafitte at the time, and really think he is a pirate. The boss of the Stamford Federation was convinced that playing the character as Burchill was doing, this gimmick could never get over with the fans, and that it wasn't going to work. While, however, during his entrances, Burchill was cheered, and that some fans even made signs for him. Vince simply had no idea how popular Jack Sparrow was, and didn't understand what the Englishman was doing. He thought he was funny while he wanted him to be more serious. And as we could see on the screen, Burchill claimed the idea of disguising himself was a tribute to his ancestor, said that he was having fun, and we could clearly see in all of his behavior that he was in a rather comedic register, in self-mockery, but Vince was in his own vision of things, disconnected from what could be successful in theaters, and didn't understand what the Brit was doing. The second element that explains the sudden stop of this gimmick, which is Burchill's version of the story, is that Disney, the entertainment behemoth that produced the Pirates of the Caribbean saga, did not appreciate the fact that one of its flagship characters was truly imitated, and would have sent a cease and desist order to WWE asking them to stop it. As the Englishman told, everything was fine until Disney got involved and didn't like that one of their creations was copied. And then this character was buried. Obviously, we can regret that things ended so soon, and it's clearly a shame to have only had 4 months of this pirate gimmick, which could have become one of the funniest characters in WWE at that time. Can you only imagine Paul Burchill in a pirate-themed show and on the big stage with a ship and cannons like WrestleMania 37, for example? On the other hand, on a personal note, I can understand the idea of him saying that he is playing a character may have disturbed Vince McMahon. It's as if The Undertaker had started his character by saying on the screen that he had decided to play an Undertaker, which would have made no sense. In the end, maybe the Burchill gimmick should have been done differently, without connecting it to an ancestor. The fact of the matter is that Burchill himself has a good memory of this period, and said about it, "It's funny, that seems to be what defines my career. People are like, oh, the pirate, and some are like, that poor guy, he had to do that. I would do it right now, I loved it." And this is perhaps what is the most important. As we will see, these 4 months as a pirate will probably remain the best of his entire career. And after that, nothing will ever be the same, both professionally and personally. After being completely buried in his pirate persona, Paul Burchill was sent back to OVW, where he will stay until January 2008. There, he was successful again by becoming heavyweight champion several times and also having the opportunity to develop a new character that he called The Whipper, a reference to the horrible serial killer Jack the Ripper in England during the 19th century. For the record, at that time, his theme song was a remix of the Imperial March, the musical theme of the Darth Vader character in Star Wars. Again, a cinematic reference. There, he will even team up with a certain Stu Saunders, who will later become Wade Barrett, the leader of the Nexus. But while he seemed to have found a new formula that worked for him, the WWE turned everything upside down once again, by making him return to the main roster in February 2008, accompanied by Katie Lee Burchill, who played his sister on the screen. There was a rather strange dynamic between the two, which suggested they had an incestuous relationship. Anyway, WWE will abandon this idea from the moment the company started doing a PG product from July 2008, while the shows were TV-14 in the previous years. I must say that in this phase of his career, Burchill was really much less unique in my opinion, by often having Katie Lee speaking for him, and we will see almost nothing worth mentioning, except a short rivalry with Kofi Kingston for the Intercontinental title in the 2008 summer and getting destroyed in 2 minutes by Batista shortly after. He would eventually bounce back in the Vince McMahon style ECW at the end of the year, where Burchill apparently felt more at home and where he was given more time to wrestle. It was the period in the WWE he liked the most, with also a smaller roster, which therefore offered him more opportunities. He remembers in particular a match against Evan Bourne in April 2009 at the O2 Arena in London, after which Vince complimented him in gorilla position by telling him he looked like a shark when he attacked in the ring. But at that time, a tragic event changed his life and made him completely question his wrestling career. What he describes as one of the worst things someone can go through happened to him. On June 19th, 2009, his older brother Sean, who was 3 years older than him and who was a major in the British Army, will die in an explosion in Afghanistan. It is an event that will make him think about his life, and it should be noted that Vince McMahon had financially taken care of the funeral. He will ask WWE to release him from his contract, a wish that the company will finally grant him in February 2010. Paul Burchill says that at that time, he came home one day and told his wife he no longer wanted to go to WWE just to be the guy who had to lose and put other wrestlers over every week. He no longer felt like a priority of the Federation, and this tragedy he experienced helped to make him aware of something. At a time when, in addition, they were about to have a second son with his wife, he needed to completely take another path professionally, because, as he said, I didn't want people to remember me as the wrestler. I needed to do a little less for myself and a little more for others. At that moment, even if he will later have some matches in the indies, he will especially take advantage of the scholarship that WWE offers to its talents to get some diplomas. And, in his case, he will succeed in having a nursing degree. And according to him, this scholarship allowed him not to go broke, since later, thanks to this program, he will become a firefighter, which he was already doing when he was not on the road with WWE just before leaving the company. And a paramedic. This is what Paul Burchill now does full-time for a living, jobs that he loves. He is even part of the SWAT team of the Jeffersontown Police in Kentucky. And we can only congratulate Paul Burchill for this incredible professional reconversion. He says that he was lucky enough to wrestle with the best in the world, and he thinks that maybe he should have done some things differently to stand out more when he was in WWE and have a better career. He also thinks that he might have been better off going to Japan rather than the United States, and that, in the end, he mainly served as a crash test for the Stamford Federation to learn how to use English wrestlers. In this new life, wrestling is now secondary, only there when he's not busy with his jobs. Seeing his friend Luke Gallows being rehired by WWE and giving his own son, who was born in 2010, the opportunity to see him wrestle is what motivated him to have a match against the veteran Gangrel in September 2023. In the end, Paul Burchill's career has undergone an amazing evolution, and we will remember that, as a pirate, he had his best hours in wrestling. And this is how our documentary about WWE's Jack Sparrow, Paul Burchill, ends. We were able to see how the Guildford native managed in just a few years to get into wrestling and catch the attention of the biggest company in the business. How he came to be inspired by Johnny Depp's performance in Pirates of the Caribbean to embody a character with a very strong identity on Smackdown in 2006, and how a tragic event deeply influenced his career. Even if there wasn't enough of them because of a backstage misunderstanding that could have largely been avoided, he still gave us some great moments, whether it was his always spectacular entrance or his comedic scenes with William Regal. And all of this makes me ask you a question. In your opinion, if he hadn't been brutally buried, how far could this pirate character have led the Englishman in the WWE? Tell us what you think. It will be very interesting to talk about it in the comments and to share our points of view together. We can say that this topic raises a lot of questions. I hope you had a good time watching this video, and I invite you to stay in the paradise of wrestling to look at some other ones. See you right away.
And that's the bottom line, 'cause Stone Cold said so. What?